So yeah, I just wanted to kind of start off just quickly, just saying thank you to B-Sides, all the organizers. What a great opportunity to be able to actually stand here in front of you and give a little bit of insight to people who are probably way smarter than me. Um, so today we're just going to be delving a little bit into the complicated realm of WAFs. We'll be kind of talking about a brief history of where WAFs came from, the short evolution, and why they've evolved the way they have. And then we'll take a look at some cool bypasses that I had time to research on, and yeah. So before we jump into that, just a little bit about me. My name is Ethan Havinga. I am a security consultant at NWR CyberSec, where I focus on the web application security side of things. My passion is overthinking edge cases. This usually makes me find myself into some pretty deep rabbit holes. And then just the reason behind the madness. I think one of the main reasons I wanted to do this talk was generally on engagements, you will have some sort of exception to any WAF in front of a web application. Clients don't want you to be testing the WAF instead of the actual web application. So you generally don't get to see or test a web application from the true perspective of an attacker, right? So if that WAF was there, what extra steps an attacker would have to take to actually maybe compromise the web application. So you just generally don't get that full picture of when actually having that exception to a WAF. I also just spent quite a bit of time delving into WAFs. Had some time to do some cool research, and yeah, I'm here to kind of share that with everybody here. So just as a small refresher, for those that might not know or do need a refresher, we'll run through a quick high-level recap of what a WAF even is, where you can find it, and a web application firewall or a WAF is usually a very small part from your greater web application environment. It's very easy to miss, very easy not to give it the attention that it actually needs, despite it actually playing a crucial role, right? So it can, in some cases, mean the difference between a compromise and having that last line of defense that might deter an attacker for a little bit longer. And the reason for this, the fact that it's a last line of defense, is because it aims to reduce the exploitability of any underlying vulnerabilities on a web application, which we'll get a bit more into later. So generally, what makes a WAF special? Just a high level, what can we expect it to do? Modern WAFs all have their own negatives and positives. They do things differently. But we can kind of expect it to follow this kind of high-level sequence. So obviously, we wanted to, hopefully, monitor requests coming in, and then actually start analyzing the contents of that request coming in. Then, while it's analyzing the contents of the request, we kind of wanted to make a determination or match some content based off of any predefined rules or some predefined logic. So just for those that might not know what a rule is, just to demystify that the picture on the right there is a screenshot from one of the Mod Security, a open source software-based web application firewall. Just a small rule there, just like kind of demystified. It's just that jumble of whatever that is, and it does stuff. Then after obviously matching and analyzing content, we wanted to make a determination, right? It should either accept or reject that request. And hopefully, in the case of a reject event, we wanted to obviously log that, and that can then feed into other systems down the line. So, WAFs in modern times. How did we kind of get from brick walls to actual cyber shields? So we'll take a quick, very brief, not drawn to scale by any means, overview of the kind of history of WAFs. So in the summer of 1999, AppShield was released. This is really one of the first products to actually inspect incoming HTTP traffic, apply some primitive logic to that content, and then actually make a determination on whether it was malicious or not. Shortly after that, Mod Security version 1 is released as a module to the Apache HTTP server that was strictly for the Apache HTTP server that would kind of do the exact same thing. Then, in a bizarre twist of events, App Shield is discontinued. I do believe there's some conspiracy theories around this. Good luck trying to find information about App Shield. There's about 2 paragraphs in their Wikipedia entry, and that's literally it. 2006, Mod Security version 2 is then released with the inclusion of a nice custom rule set development language that you could use to then actually implement your own custom rules. Then, kind of in my opinion, a very key point in the evolution of WAFs and how WAFs have evolved over the period of time, we saw the emergence of cloud-based WAFs. Things like Akamai and Cloudflare being released and being provided as a service. Then, to keep up with that, ModSec kind of ported into libmodsec for better integration into other HTTP servers. And yeah, to just kind of keep up with the ever-evolving cloud environment. Then for the present, I think especially with the new, stronger AI and machine learning models coming out, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how we can actually apply the new innovative technology coming out to WAFs and how they actually make determinations. So from Brickwall to Cyber Shield, software WAFs were not that good back in the day, or software-based WAFs were not that good back in the day. They were seen as glorified filters to some extent. I believe one of the main reasons for this is definitely the computational limits that were imposed on machines back in those days. So you couldn't have as many rules being applied to content that is coming in until cloud, because cloud was seen as easier and way more scalable. And it was a lot easier to adopt a WAF into a larger state at that point because a lot of people were already migrating to massive cloud-based environments. And it's also not on-prem. Somebody else is doing the hard lifting, paying for the machines that had a lot more computational power at that point. So we also kind of then see a major shift in the techniques over the years that have been used. So from things like static attack signature detection, just some very primitive logic that you apply to content, to things like behavioral analysis, really adding a dynamic aspect to the techniques that WAFs are using, instead of the more primitive static techniques that they used to use. And there's kind of a main reason for this, or I believe one of the main reasons for this is we've also seen with this the result of the evolution is because of a need for WAFs to keep up with ever-evolving attackers and attack techniques and those different threat actors, because they've also become more complex over the years. And now everything seems to be AI-powered in modern days, but really with the emergence of better and stronger AI and machine learning models, you've been able to actually see that being implemented to actually add that dynamic aspect to WAFs, instead of, again, that static fallback that it would always rely on. And a wise man once said, context is king. Not only have attackers become more complex and attack techniques, the web applications themselves have become more complex. I mean, try explaining or count on your fingers how many times you've had to help grandparents or parents actually use web applications, because they have become a lot more complex. Their use cases have become a lot more complex, and WAFs have had to generally keep up with that, right? WAFs should be able to differentiate at this point in that complex environment between normal behavior and something that is not normal, which is a great task they have to undertake, especially with the complexity of web applications within our time. So I just to run through, before we get into kind of the juicy part, we need to kind of understand how to approach a WAF. On engagements, we need to understand how to approach it, or is there a way to be consistent when approaching WAFs, and have that ability to actually develop bypasses relatively consistently. I know we were talking about mindfulness and no stress, stuff like that in the keynote, but my personal methodology kind of goes completely against that. So I follow a very iterative approach. This is generally my personal methodology. It's up to you if you want to take it. Just an overview of it, we start off by just obviously having a payload. You want to create a bypass for this specific payload, chucking it in, see what the WAF detects, playing around with it, and actually having a list of things that WAF actually detects, right? We'll go into more detail on each step. But yeah, having that baseline, seeing what the WAF is actually detecting before we can actually continue. Then, after you have that list of blocked elements, per se, to then obfuscate. Obviously, you want to perform obfuscation and obfuscation on the actual blocked elements. No point in obfuscating parts of the payload that aren't really being detected at that point. Then the fun part, testing. Testing the payload and just seeing what happens. This is probably one of the more fun parts. You never really know what's going to happen when chucking payloads at a WAF. And then this is the part that kind of goes against the whole mindfulness thing. Repeat. Repeat until you have a working bypass or you lose your mind. I have a very tedious and methodical approach to this. So again, this is not for everybody. If you want to, go for it. And throughout, while we dive through each step, we'll have a little practical, and we'll kind of just apply the methodology to a practical example. The practical example is just a mock cross-site scripting payload, and we'll kind of see how the methodology kind of applies to a practical example. Step one, identify. This is probably one of the hardest parts. It's really a game of Where's Wally, trying to actually identify exactly what a WAF is picking up on. There's so much that a WAF can actually be detecting in your payload. It does get frustrating at times, trying to find exactly what a WAF is actually detecting. But kind of a general guide, a high-level guide on what things to look out for is obviously keywords. Looking for those keywords that it could be detecting, combinations of characters, and then obviously combinations of keywords and characters. So to kind of put this into perspective, our example WAF is detecting the SVG keyword, as well as obviously a HTML parameter, which is obviously the combination of that space and then the word equals, and then obviously the quotation marks, and etc., etc. So now we have a kind of a list, or we know what is being detected in our payload. Now we can kind of work on how to create a bypass for that. This is adults playing dress up. There's so much that you can do. The limit is really just your imagination and keeping a level of syntactic correctness. That is a key point that I will stress throughout the talk. It's imperative that you do keep syntactic correctness. It doesn't help you obfuscate a payload. It bypasses the WAF and then doesn't execute properly. So there's, again, a lot that you can do. Things like the OWASP cheat sheets do help a lot if you want to look at those different techniques, kind of explore what you can do to payloads to maybe get them to bypass. But a general toolkit that you always have is always just character encoding. Most WAFs have like a decent, the ability to distinguish from your character encoding. And then space manipulation, very big one, trying to make it seem that your payload is one massive invalid HTML tag by replacing spaces with a character that might still be rendered properly when on an HTML page, right? And then this is the rule logic flaws. This one really speaks to things like SQL injection that we will get into. Really trying to kind of catch the WAF out, right? Trying to find things that the people setting up those default rule sets might have missed, and kind of using that to leverage in your journey of creating a bypass. Yeah, do whatever floats your boat as long as it makes sense. I'm not going to limit, I'm not going to put out a standard. Generally just do whatever you want. It just has to make sense. That syntactic correctness is something you have to be mindful. So our practical, this is actually one of the payloads we'll be talking about later in the bypasses. We determined that it was detecting that the combination of that tag and then space, parameter, etc. So what do? Eliminate the space. This now to a WAF looks like one massive HTML tag that's obviously clearly not malicious since it's invalid. So why let it through? Just let it through. Won't do anything, and it really points out just below that the arrow pointing to that is still the exact same payload that we started off with. Really keeping syntactic correctness. This is the exact same payload. It will execute the exact same way, with the inclusion of now our obfuscation. Next step, fun part. Generally, because you will never know what will happen, chances are it will not work the first time. But especially with this methodology or this approach, it's important not to really give up. It is very hard, since people have been doing bypass development. People have been trying to create bypasses for WAFs for a very long time. So being able to find new ones is very hard. It is going to be a very repetitive and tedious process, but just don't really give up there. Because at the end of the day, it is like building Legos. You are going to be taking away, adding on, much like building Legos. So it is going to be iterative, not just with my approach, but in general. You will always be adding modifications, removing modifications, and going through that whole process. And roadblocks are a guarantee. Nobody has all the knowledge. You will feel frustrated at times. Generally, it's important to kind of keep that in mind and kind of acknowledge that roadblocks will occur. You won't always think of different things to do, and it's important to kind of take a step back and approach it from a different perspective at times. But the most important thing is just kind of keep going until you either have a working bypass or you just lose your mind and completely give up, which has almost happened to me quite a few times in my process. So now that we kind of know how to approach a WAF in hindsight, let's look at some of the juicy parts for the next two sections. We'll first go through some example payloads that are claimed to be bypasses, but don't actually get bypassed. So just a preface before we go through this, I'm a sucker for default configs in a sense. One reason is I believe during research this provides some form of consistency. And secondly, the reason for the default configs is a lot of organizations and people who might not be that technical will kind of look at WAFs as plug and play. They'll just insert it into their environment, leave it at whatever the defaults are, and kind of assume that now their web application is safe. So it's kind of quick and dirty security, basically. So the WAFs that fall into my research was the Cloudflare WAF, the Azure Gateway WAF, and then the mod security software WAF. So the key difference between them is the first two are paid. The last one is open source and free. We'll see why that matters in a second. And then by the defaults, and for Cloudflare, that means being on paranoia level 1 with a medium anomaly threshold. Then for Azure, the stock standard implementation as per Microsoft's convoluted documentation. And then the default Microsoft managed rule set. Then for mod security, just straight out of the box as you git clone it. And then obviously these are just the core rule set that mod security does provide. We'll also have a nice little template just to kind of show like payload, whether it bypassed or not, and then some pretty fun observations throughout the throughout the examples. So to start off with, probably one of the more common vulnerabilities, cross-site scripting. Most of these payloads that were blocked, you'll find in, again, public word lists that kind of claim that this is a bypass word list, run it through something like burps intruder, and nothing works. So the first one there just being a mumbo jumble of character encoding, so URL encoding and HTML entity encoding. And then the second one there, much to my PTSD, JSFuck, that basically means substituting normal human readable JavaScript for whatever that thing is. And it still makes sense, apparently. Yeah, so the third one there, just kind of being more obscure tags, more tags that people don't often use, kind of hoping that the WAF doesn't really have that in its, let's say, block list, or doesn't really understand that that is a valid HTML tag, trying to get that through. So when it comes to generally XSS, to take JSFuck as an example, a lot of WAFs have rule sets specifically catering towards JSFuck. I did mention people have been doing this for a very long time. They've been doing this since WAFs have basically come out. And finding bypasses is going to be hard, especially for XSS, because most WAFs do have it down to a T. And to get those bypasses, you're either going to have to, I don't know, find logic flaws or do some pretty crazy things, as we'll see. SQL injection, this is just for all variations. I don't discriminate. So the payloads here, they don't look that complicated. Main reason for that is there's a fine line, especially for SQL, that has to be human readable and human writable. It's a very simple language. There's only so much you can obfuscate the word select. There's only so much you can do to a SQL payload while still having it make sense and not return a syntax error in the end. So like a lot of these you'll see with the bypasses kind of target, again, logic flaws within the different WAFs. So for the first one there, just kind of chucking comments. Second one there, just chucking around some brackets there, trying to abuse any keyword matching. Third one, the exact same thing. And the fourth one, just for shits and giggles, just chucking everything at it, trying to see what it does. And obviously all of them being blocked, which is definitely good. Then some other common, more niche vulnerabilities that you do see. Just to point something very interesting out, there's a CSTI payload, a XML, external entity injection payload, and then that CSV payload. By default, Cloudflare does not have rules to block the bottom two. So yeah, good luck. If your web application revolves around XML, enjoy writing custom rules for Cloudflare. So it's really interesting to see that the more niche vulnerabilities aren't generally catered to by default. So if you do have that environment that makes use of functionality that could be targeted for these vulnerabilities, yeah, you're going to have to look at either increasing that configuration, which a lot of people don't do, or increasing the kind of strictness of your WAF, which a lot of people either don't know how to do or just don't do, or you're going to have to start writing some custom rule sets. Now let's look at some payloads that manage to bypass or just, yeah, funny things happening. Cross-site scripting, starting with that again. The first one there is actually the one we used during the methodology practical, kind of fairly heavily obfuscated, making it seem like one massive HTML tag. Obviously, when a WAF looks at that, that does seem like an invalid HTML tag, so just kind of let it through. No harm, because it isn't even valid. Second one there, by default, Cloudflare doesn't block object tags. So if you're an attacker and the web app is protected by Cloudflare, yeah, have fun just injecting an object tag with whatever your payload is, base64 encoded, just completely bypasses it. And then that third one there was kind of an accidental one that I found. I noticed that the Azure Gateway WAF was looking at open tags and opening closing tags, but not any HTML closing tags. So you can kind of just start injecting closing tags to kind of traverse the HTML hierarchy and actually inject content into different places on a web application. So for the example there, I managed to kind of just inject some content into the help section of a demo web application, which could open up some pretty cool things for potentially phishing. So SQL, now compared to cross-site scripting, these do look very simple, but these are all exploit primitives. They are very simple in nature. They do work by themselves, but they can also form part of bigger payloads. Now, granted, adding them to bigger payloads might get blocked because the other parts of the payload might be getting blocked. But most of these are just fairly simple. The first one there, Cloudflare blocked the classic or1 equals 1 when it was an integer comparison. Just changing it to a string comparison seems to completely bypass it. Then again, Cloudflare did not block order by default. So if that's a vector that is available to you, have fun. And then the third one there, kind of, again, confusing any keyword matching, making that just seem completely invalid, to then obviously get that bypass going. So if you notice the trend throughout the tables, mod security had almost no bypasses. This could technically just be a skill issue. I could have just not spent enough time on it. But I believe it's something a lot greater than that. And that brings us into the open source initiative. I really think that in terms of something like mod security, this has been a great driver for the evolution of WAFs. I believe the benefits of this is massive. I don't believe you can go wrong with the open source, or having a WAF that is open source, and then getting people, apes together strong, getting people from all walks in the cybersecurity industry coming together and applying their practical knowledge to a singular project, which is not something you see happen often. And it literally costs a penny and a packet of peanuts. It does not take a lot to get people in the cybersecurity industry excited for very often seemingly small things. So getting people excited to actually contribute to things like this, and actually then promoting attackers and defenders playing together, which is not something you always see, is always that kind of fine line, that separating line between red and blue. But where that breaks down is when you have open source projects like mod security, for example, that allows you to then compile the practical experience from both sides of the spectrum to then further the capability of a WAF. So I really think this has been a great driver. Obviously, we can't expect Cloudflare and Microsoft to go open source within the next month, but I do think it has been a great driver for WAFs in general, and kind of the whole cybersecurity industry for any tooling generally. So kind of just before we wrap up, let's kind of take a detour and address some misconceptions that you commonly see with the, first of all, implementation of WAFs and how people generally view WAFs. For that, we need to understand the difference between mitigation and remediation. Mitigation, gaslighting yourself into thinking a vulnerability is fixed. When in reality, you're just making it harder to exploit an underlying vulnerability. WAFs do not remediate. They make it, that's why bypasses exist. By that logic, WAFs are a mitigating factor. It's fairly common to see people using it as a solution, slapping a WAF in front of your web application and saying, well, it's secured, let's just leave it like that. When in reality, it should be seen as a last line of defense and not really as a solution to fixing anything, right? So prioritization should always be put on remediating vulnerabilities and kind of learning from that and applying what you learned during that process of remediation, and maybe developing rule sets and applying what you learned then to the actual WAF sitting in front of your web application. Because it's, again, all too common to see individuals or organizations, especially individuals that use something like Cloudflare, which it does cater to something like your personal blog, for example. And they might not be super technical, and just implement that WAF and kind of assume that their web application is now secure and impenetrable, when in reality, it's definitely not. Another thing you do see a lot is the implementation of custom crypto. And how does this kind of affect a WAF, if there is one in your environment? WAFs are not smart. They don't have the ability to decrypt custom crypto. Main reason for this is they were developed by third parties to be used as a third-party service. They were not developed with any of your custom cryptography in mind. So it's really imperative that you be cognizant of in what state requests are hitting WAFs. If it hits a WAF in an encrypted form, it's not going to be able to actually decrypt that and perform its job. This inherently defeats the purpose of a WAF. And it is something you do see in some architectures every now and then, where you really have to be cognizant, not just for custom crypto, but just the general implementation of a WAF. You have to be cognizant of where is content hitting your WAF, in what state is it hitting your WAF. Can the WAF actually perform what it's meant to do when content actually hits it at that point? So, just for the last slide, there's just some key takeaways that just to like run through what we kind of talked about at a high level. We talked about, we just refreshed our hacker vocabulary. We kind of just talked about, okay, what is a WAF? The general history of WAFs. And then we jumped straight into grade 8 history lessons and kind of talked about where WAFs came from, why have they evolved the way they have. I think also grouping in the open source portion in this does it justice, where you really see a lot of innovative technology coming from open source projects. And then we kind of looked at just my kind of weird methodology, or my weird approach. Again, I don't recommend it to anybody unless you want to, up to you. At potentially achieving consistency, running through that very tedious process. And I think a very big takeaway for this is to kind of look at it and find something that works for you. It is called a personal methodology for a reason. It does not work for everybody. Everybody they do things differently, and it's really about finding that thing that actually works for you. We then also kind of, again, touched on that open source initiative, where when red and blue come together, they do amazing things. It's a line that's always kind of bothered me, where there's always that separation between red and blue, and having something like mod security being open sourced, where you can get both of those parties together and actually contribute to the actual capability of something used by the greater community, is something really cool to see. So we also then just quickly put WAFs in their place to some extent. We talked about, hey, WAFs do not fix vulnerabilities. They are mitigating factors. They probably won't ever fix vulnerabilities, and kind of being cognizant of where you put your WAF. Making sure that your WAF can actually perform what it's supposed to do. It can actually perform the job. And yeah, generally, just as another takeaway, just really driving home the mental aspect of it, especially with the methodology, is it is hard to approach a WAF. I feel bad for attackers when they have to they look at a web application that does have a WAF on it. Having that methodology, it is very tedious, but it is, in the end, technically possible to achieve some level of consistency, especially in the case where you might lose your mind, but yeah. Any questions? Yeah. 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 Yeah, I would generally want to go into more. I think it would be really, really nice, but again, my methodology kind of makes it a very slow and tedious process. So those three were all I had the ability to do within the time I was given. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that happened so much. It, I think it's really cool to actually see, right? Maybe it's an attack, like putting it in the shoes of an attacker, right? Sitting in front of the WAF and the attacker trying to see if that vulnerability actually exists, and then the WAF coming in and blocking that after the 5th attempt without the attacker actually having the ability to then confirm that it actually existed. Really fun to see, very painful, but yeah. Any more? Yeah. I spun a wheel. No, I think I chose Cloudflare because mainly it's kind of what I see a lot of people use on like personal blogs, for example. It's something that a lot of non-technical people can really actually use. It's not that hard to set up. They have a really great guide, so it's something you see less technical people to some extent use. I'm not saying that people using Cloudflare are not technical. Please don't sue me. The second one obviously is just Azure, so that is catering towards the more enterprise level environments, and then mod security because it's open source. Kind of wanted to make a point, but yeah, just also having that free alternative, seeing how the free alternative compares to the paid and more, I guess, enterprise grade WAFs. Cool. Any more? Oh yeah. Providing authentication to the WAF. Yeah, definitely. I guess, yeah. So having like, let's say a cookie that's like authenticated, I'm assuming that's what you mean? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like technical things that are like being worked on. Like I did mention in the history part of it. It's really cool to see how new technologies and how it is kind of evolving constantly. I think that's one part of WAFs that always impresses me. It's constantly evolving, especially now with new technologies being created. And yeah, I think that could be a cool idea. Any last questions? Cool. Thank you everybody for coming to my talk, and enjoy the rest of B-Sides.
Across the attack surface, scattered products and siloed views create blind spots that feel unstoppable. The deadliest risks are in these gaps, where attackers move in. It's time to unify fragmented snapshots into one all-seeing view of risk and unleash a platform born with one intention: isolate and eradicate your priority exposures. From IT infrastructure to cloud environments to critical infrastructure and everywhere in between. This is Tenable. Your exposure ends here.